like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Susan Whitham Bannister, who is currently the president and CEO of Biomedical Growth Strategies and also the president of Association for Women in Science. Susan?
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here. And David, let me echo that. That was such an insightful and revealing talk. I really enjoyed it. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this conversation. And I'll start with just a quick thumbnail sketch of my own professional journey, which, as I think is often the case, has been quite a zigzagged pathway. I attended Wellesley College because two of my friends had been recently recruited and encouraged me to apply. As a freshman, I was one of 8 Black women in a class of 400 and one of 32 Black women in a student body of 1,600. This was in 1968. I should pause here to note that I was not a science major at Wellesley. My first job out of college was with Model Cities in the city of Boston's largest Black community. I then entered a doctoral program at the Heller School at Brandeis and subsequently completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Still no science degree. By then I had determined that science has a business side, which is extremely important and influential in how the field is shaped and what the pathways to leadership can be. And that's where I wanted to focus to try and make an impact. I worked for over 30 years at one of the nation's largest think tanks, Abt Associates, where I had expanding executive leadership roles. And in 2008, I was hired as the founding CEO of a new $1 billion investment fund being created in Massachusetts by the state legislature and the state's first African-American governor, Deval Patrick, to accelerate the pace of life sciences innovation and commercialization in the state. As CEO of that $1 billion life sciences initiative, I became the first African-American to lead an innovation initiative of this scale. I left that role in 2015, and since then I have been a strategy advisor to other national and international life sciences initiatives. I currently serve on the board of several life sciences companies and organizations. As you heard, I chair the National Governing Board of the Association for Women in Science. And in 2015, I finally received a degree in science, a PhD honoris causa from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Along this pathway, I have continually faced questions and barriers that made me wonder, do I belong here? And I've stood in my own way. I turned down a leadership role at a midpoint in my career because I didn't have the confidence to take it on. The job went to a white male, and when he failed, I marched myself into the CEO's office and asked for the job. And I've never again underestimated the importance of courage in stepping into a leadership role. So let me talk now about the factors that I feel were important to my own journey and I believe are important in nurturing and preparing rising leaders. The first is role models. My journey to leadership was most significantly influenced by the fact that from my childhood, I had role models who showed me every day that I could be whatever I wanted. As the saying goes, it's hard to be something that you've never seen. Seeing is believing. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri in the 50s, a time when the city was a majority Black city and generally segregated. I lived on the north side of St. Louis, which is where nearly all African Americans in the city lived at that time, regardless of professional and socioeconomic status. And as is often the case in segregated cities, there were institutions committed to training people of African heritage. And as a result, St. Louis had a relatively large professional class of African Americans and Black people. So as a kid, I had role models and mentors all around me. I found more role models at Abt Associates, a company where the founder, Clark Abt, had a reputation as a pioneer committed to diverse leadership. The company always had female executives. The current CEO is Kathleen Flanagan, And Wendell Knox, who was the CEO of Abt Associates from 1992 to 2009, is African American. And so there I had the opportunity to experience firsthand how diverse leaders manifest different styles of leadership. Now, we can't forget that role modeling can perpetuate bad behavior as well. And there is certainly a culture of toxic masculinity in the life sciences, and that is still rewarded. And I think that women who reach levels of leadership frequently feel as if they must adapt this leadership style. I was reading an article just yesterday about Natalie Egan, who was a trans woman who began transitioning at age 38. As a male, she had been a successful tech entrepreneur, and she started a second business following her transition. And she was stunned at the difference in the reaction that she received as a male entrepreneur versus a female entrepreneur. She acknowledges that in her career as a white male, she ran her companies using role models of the way that she had seen other men run companies. She made decisions with little input based on the ideal that representation and diversity slow things down. The model, she says, is go, go, go. We don't have time for your opinions. That's a mindset that I think continues and provides a lot of barriers. My key observations based on my own experience with the importance of role models are that those of us who have achieved positions of leadership must be visible. Our presence demonstrates to young people what they can achieve, and it provides proof points that underrepresented minorities and women make significant contributions to the STEM community. I think we also need to make visible, elevate, and reward role models that demonstrate different ways of approaching leadership and who provide alternatives to current stereotypes. A second factor is the importance of historically Black colleges and universities and women's colleges. My father was a surgeon. He was a graduate of Talladega College, which is an HBCU in Alabama, and Howard Medical School in Washington, D.C., also an HBCU. He came to St. Louis for his surgical residency because at that time, very few hospitals in the U.S. trained Black residents. My mother, also a graduate of Talladega, was one of the first Black women to receive a master's in social work from Smith College. HBCUs to this day have been the major training grounds for Black professionals who currently serve as role models for young people of color. They also remain a major source of the talent pipeline that STEM fields will need. So we must support HBCUs financially, and we must establish stronger linkages between HBCUs and the STEM community. I have some specific suggestions which I can discuss in the Q&A section I can provide to the organizers. There's also a role for women's colleges, which have really dwindled in number over the years. Wellesley College had very few women of color when I attended the college, but it was an all-women's college. The vast majority of the faculty and administration were female. So again, I had role models. A second observation I have is about supporting and mentoring networks. Despite attending an Ivy League college, I found that the advisory services and the supporting personnel to be severely lacking for me as a Black student. And this trend continues to this day. Just last week, I was a special guest at an organization called Friends of Sarah, which is a support group in Boston for doctoral and postdoctoral female students who are in crisis. I have to tell you, the stories that they told were horrendous. We need to scale these types of programs. And last Sunday, I spent 3 hours on the phone with a young woman I've known since she was a child, an honors student, who is in college and has aspirations of becoming a neurologist. She had just failed her chemistry midterm and has approached a number of faculty at the university about being her mentor. She has a GPA of 3.6, but she's been told by these prospective mentors that they only want to mentor students with a 3.75 GPA. She's thinking about changing her major. Many colleges and universities fail to support women and students of color. We desperately need mentoring, coaching, and support networks at local, regional, state, and even national levels, that students can access. Maybe all students who declare themselves to be science majors among entering college should receive, along with their acceptance letters, information about programs like the one that you're going to hear Dr. Joan Reed discuss later in this session. And I think that there are organizations like the Association for Women in Science who could be very strong partners in scaling this. Another observation I have is about myths, urban legends, and stereotypes regarding STEM careers. One stereotype that I believe has significantly thwarted efforts to increase the STEM leadership pipeline is the myth that career paths in science in STEM are primarily available to scientists. I'm a perfect example that that is not the case. And I believe that this is one of the great smoke screens that enables life sciences stakeholders to resist DE&I initiatives. We've all heard the argument. We can't find the talent we need, citing the number of women and underrepresented minorities in doctorates and postdoctoral fellowships in the sciences each year. But this argument overlooks the fact that in STEM companies, at least, employees who represent the operating talent of the company, finance, legal, HR, tech, marketing, administration, logistics, manufacturing, far outweigh the number of scientists. So while we work to increase the number of women and underrepresented minorities who are receiving science degrees, there are large numbers who annually receive degrees that fall outside the category of science, but fall into the category of operational support, and who are not encouraged to consider careers in the life sciences. STEM companies also can find minority professionals in operating roles in other industries, and then they often have excellent work experience and are ready to assume leadership roles in our industry. This is closely related to another myth that I have observed, that in the STEM fields, your effective, that is your technical classroom skills, are the key to leadership, versus what I call affective skills, emotional intelligence, learning to identify the power centers in an organization, how to make the ask regarding your career goals and opportunities that you would like to have. What does the pathway to advancement really look like? And how do you get on that path? And the fact is that the further you rise in leadership roles, the more important your affective skills are. I believe that all companies should offer training in these skills to potential leaders. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about social vaccines and creating inoculations. I've been reading recently about social vaccines theory and stereotype inoculation. And I have come to the conclusion that this framework is extremely relevant in explaining my own leadership journey. In her article in Psychology Inquiry, Nilajana Dasgupta says that social vaccine theory starts with the premise that an individual's choice to pursue one academic or professional path over another is really not a free choice. It's influenced by subtle cues in achievement and in achievement environments that signal who belongs there and who does not. And people gravitate towards achievement domains where they believe that they will be in sync with the group stereotypes, and they move away from the domains where they perceive that they deviate too far from the in-group stereotypes. Even individuals who are high performers may withdraw from certain achievement domains if they don't perceive that they fit the stereotype. And this was certainly my own experience in stepping away from a leadership role at one point in my career. So we have to create vaccines to inoculate against the negative effects of the stereotypes in STEM. We need to explore this model and use it to build programs and interventions. It's been a pleasure to talk with you today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our other speakers and being part of the broader conversation. Thank you.